Hello there.
Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Oh, thank you, Bonnicastle. Hi, folks. Come in and have a seat. There's another seat there. Good to see you today. Well, I've got today my new grandson. His name is Sean. He's 23 weeks old. And according to the Baby Bump application that my wife and her daughter go to with some regularity, in the 23rd week, he's referred to as this is the Tasmanian Devil Week. And so that's what he is. But he's my youngest grandson. I've got two other grandchildren. TJ, Matthew, he's at UVic getting ready for his MBA law degree there. And my middle granddaughter, Megan Ann, she's at what's the name of the funny little school? What is it, dear?
St. Michael's.
Oh, St. Michael's University. St. Michael's University, and she's doing very well there. And of course, Sean here's today to say hello to all the MBA folks out there. And he's a pudgy little sucker, and quite love him, quite enjoy him. In fact, my life is changing. Honey, you want to come get him? My life is changing.
Whoa.
Oops, got him? Good, thank you.
That was fun.
And so in the evening with my glass of scotch and paper the way it used to be, now somebody jams this little 4 or 5 month old in my hand and said, hold this. And so my life is shifting a little bit. In any event, let's get underway if we can as to what's in the news. I think I want to talk initially about papers, if I can. All the papers get 1 or 2 emails, and it's entirely my fault. A lot of moving parts in this course, trying to keep them on track. But all of them are the same. They're due at midnight on the Sunday, and I've published those dates. And so if you just go by that, it's just regular clock, but last Sunday. Just make sure everybody that has to work on the weekend has an opportunity to finish it. Marking your deliverable ones now. We'll work through this weekend to try to close them up, but certainly by a week from this Friday, before we get ready for the next one, you'll have this one back. Certainly the What's in the News has been very successful. That's the good news and the bad news. The good news is so successful, and the bad news is so successful because, like you, my little feet are just scrambling like a duck underwater, trying to keep up with you folks. It's just amazing the way it's taken off in the intellectual capital. And the content and discussions are quite interesting, and they all relate back to what we need to know to craft strategy. We can't be in isolation. We must be part of that spider web of the globe, and so I thank you for that. One of the interesting posts we got this week was about prisons in Canada, and I just wanted to expand that a little bit more if I can. The Canadian system versus the American. The American system puts great weight on public-private partnerships. And we'll cover public-private partnerships in this course. You should be at least familiar with the concept and the terms and some of the 20 different models that you can employ when time comes. You may need a consultant, but as governments are forced to do more with less, you'll see more and more public-private partnerships springing up. They're not a panacea for everything, but they are good for some things like building bridges, toll roads, and in my mind, it's the type of thing that I would use. Government's got only X number of dollars, and so if a private sector will get involved in building something within those communities that it makes sense, there's a business case and there's a return on investment, then it might be best to let the private sector do that. And then we go to Canada's north and isolated places where the private sector says not interested. That's where we should take our few resources to provide similar services to those places. So just a thought, we might discuss that, but the public-private partnerships in the states have really taken off in their prison system. That states and counties down there actually go and build prisons by the private sector, and they guarantee that they'll fill so many bed spaces. And of course, they want an annual growth of so much as any business would. And therein lies the problem of why so many blacks and downtrodden folks get pulled off the streets to fill the bed spaces. And the number of incarcerated people in the states on a per capita basis is far higher than any other nation. Canada's not too far behind. And in large part, this is on the soft drugs, the marijuana. So maybe a discussion this week is the public-private partnerships of prisons, but also the marijuana in the court system. We're incarcerating so many folks for these soft drugs, and the Ledane Commission report in 1973, a real good in-depth study, didn't find it any more serious than having a glass of beer. And so we could discuss the merits of on and off for marijuana, and should it be criminalized, and should we taint the life of an individual for life to have a criminal record for being involved with marijuana. It may be a gateway drug. I don't believe it is, but we could talk about that. But the other part of that, imagine for a moment if we were able to contract the size of the prison system. It's an industry. There are prisons, there are the guards in the system, there are social workers that are attached onto that, there's the court system, the lawyers involved in criminal law, the social safety networks, the welfare when they come out, the halfway houses, the rehabilitation. It goes on and on the list of, again, saving money, cutting back on the size of government. For those of us who are of the right-wing persuasion, this is an area that to me has fertile ground that we could do some criminal code reform here and get back to the serious crimes and maybe come up with another solution for these soft drugs. Anyway, just a thought today that somebody raised in an email that I thought I might want to discuss here very briefly. Front page of the paper today, they talk in terms of the Saudi Arabia and those 70 armored personnel carriers. So 6 export permits have been put in place to go to the Saudis, been signed off quietly, not a lot of fanfare, and now it's been out. The contract's found its way to the light, and our current government has authorized that. So we've had a debate already whether that's a good or a bad thing that we should be selling these sort of weapons, tools of war, to countries that have difficulties with human rights. Rousseff, our Brazilian president, feels betrayed. Her vice president tried to make a run at taking over the government down in Brazil. It's a basket case. We've talked about it. Olympics coming up, and the story continues. Whether we talk more about that or not, that's your choice as we go through it. My little arthritic fingers here. There's an assisted dying bill, which is going to be put in place, introduced on this week, that it will allow for individuals, physician-assisted suicide will be put in place. It can't impact on the mentally ill or minors. They're excluded from this, but others will have the ability to give consent and will be able to have a doctor's assistance. And I recall taking my pup, had a little Yorkie terrier, and she had a bit of cancer in about 16, 15 years, taking her in, and how humane it was simply to hold her and stroke her while she got an injection. And I can tell you it was within a second or seconds, 1 or 2, she was gone. No pain, no whimper, just eyes shut and went. And if we do that for our dogs, how much more humane it would be to do it for these folks. I appreciate it's a contentious issue, but we should have a position on that as strategists and running businesses, and with your mums and dads, you'll probably be faced that very question. EU holds off its decision on visas for Canadians and Americans. Canada and to a lesser extent America have stepped forward saying, well, we've had this free open visa exchange, sort of an equal level playing field. With respect to Romania and Bulgaria, we're not going to allow those visas just to walk in freely. We're going to do a little more scrutiny on them. And now the EU, all 28 nations over there, have stood up and saying, whoa, stop. We need to consider then what our position will be with respect to Canada and the U.S. getting visas coming to France, say, on vacation. And will you be able to get a visa? Or will it be a more complex process to go through to get clearance to come in on your trip to France? And in France's case, we spend $1.3 billion a year as a tourist industry for France. And it's all coming to a head. They put off their decision for another couple of months, hopefully trying to find some resolution to this. But it's all part of that immigration process and knowing who's in your country and allowing a free flow of those folks into our country is a concern. And so it's just something we talk about. So the visas for Canada and America might be looked at this week. I chuckled at this one, the turtle smuggler. He's got 5 years sentence for doing it, but he's had a series. It's a Chinese gentleman who has been doing a series of taking out of Canada turtles in his pants, taking them over there and selling them, and got caught last time. I think it was 51 turtles up his legs at the Ontario border in 2014. But it wasn't a one-off. It had a series of muling, taking the stuff back and forth. This time he got caught. Debate, gender politics. We talked about this week the situation down south on gays and lesbians and acts. There's a big spread on it in different states today in the paper. All right, that's that one. In the business side of the house, oil is surging back on track. And it's interesting, what's driven that is not so much the demand-supply curve and the normal course of things, but we have a meeting taking place in Doha, D-O-H-A, very shortly, this week or the first of next, where select oil companies, primarily OPEC nations and a few others, are coming together to look at this demand and the glut we have for oil and what to do about it. And some information leaked out yesterday that the Russians and the Saudis appear to be prepared to cut back on their supply that they're going to put into the marketplace. Well, that impacts the demand-supply curve, and so they're prepared to try to lift the price collectively that way. Iran was part of that, and Iran said no. And of course, it's got a running battle with America, and they need the revenue coming in, and they also this way continue to hurt the Americans and other nations by holding the price low. And so nations of the African community, Azerbaijan, of Nigeria, Venezuela, Brazil, a lot of these countries are basket cases right now with the low price for oil. And as a result of that, their economies are collapsing, their social infrastructure is collapsing, and so they've knocked on the IMF's door saying help. And the IMF is getting ready and putting a package together for about $15 billion to come in to help bail out these countries and get them up and going, much like the Greece bailout of a while back. And of course, the money from the IMF, some comes from its own reserves, but other comes from you and I. It comes from the G7, G8 countries in large part. And so America, which continues to pay a large part of the IMF bill, and Canada to a lesser extent, will have to go down the basement and print some more paper to support this if they can't get the price of oil up. And so we see this thing that maybe the IMF has been motivated, driven largely by the Americans, to put the pressure on the Saudis to break this stranglehold, because the Saudis wanted to disrupt the fracking industry in America in large part, because the quantity of oil they're producing in America is going up exponentially, and it's disrupting the demand-supply curve. And so the only option is to allow the price of oil to settle, or for somebody to blink first and to bring down their supply. The globe needs about 90 million barrels a day, and if we can drop that down by 200 or 300 million barrels, we can get the supply back in line with the demand, and therefore the price of oil will come up. This, my sense, will drive the price, if it goes through, will drive the oil up about $10. I think at least $10 a barrel. From yesterday it was 42 as a result of this leak. 52 maybe, drive it up to about 52, give or take a few pennies. But often what happens in these is that the Saudis or one other member of the OPEC nations, while they agree to it, start quietly and in the back room selling off a little more because they want the extra cash at the higher price. And then the agreement goes out the window, and then the thing comes down again. So long term, I don't put much faith in it, but short term, we may see the price of oil go up. And with oil, of course, keep in mind we're a petrocurrency, our dollar will go up. And so we went up yesterday on the news of this. We're now up to about 78.5 cents. And if it goes up 10 cents, we could well be up into the low 80s for the Canadian dollar in the very near future, which is has its own implications, and we can talk about some of those as what a high Canadian dollar means on import-export and our balance of trade. Music industry, a change. They're saying that for the first time, the download music, the digital music, is outpaced the actual buying the CDs and the records the old-fashioned way. That more of the revenue comes in now from digital, which is interesting. This is a story here about the Inuit internet users' high cost, low speeds in the north, and they give some sort of price chart down here that if you went to Rogers down here locally in southern Canada, a good top-of-the-line package is about $80 a month. For far less download speed, significantly download speed, folks up north pay almost $400 a month from their nonprofit Broadband Development Corporation. And so it's something we have to consider in Canada. We talked a bit about one of the cohorts is balancing that, because I think we agree the internet is an educational tool. It's some refer to it as almost an essential service, that in order to be educated, participate in the global community and understand what's going on, and to keep that playing field level, developing areas of Canada, like the North, need the internet and need it budget priced or the same price we do. And so how do we do that? And certainly if we look out in front, there's a number of companies, Microsoft, Facebook in particular, are looking at new pads and ways on solar-powered drones and other methods to get the signal down, budget price to these communities that will lead that ahead. there was a 10-year plan put out by Facebook. I was reading yesterday on that, and they expect that's part of the 10-year plan. They're going to have some budget-priced new Internet of Everything innovative ways to deliver the Internet rather than the cables going into bang on to the side of the house, like TELUS just did this past week to my home, running a high-speed cable in. Well, they may find that Facebook within 10 years has got a cheaper, more effective system that doesn't need to be hardwired. So we could talk a bit about the need for Internet up north and again, the technology shifts that are coming our way. Alberta and deadlines, and it's interesting here. We see the New Democratic Party is taking the gloves off and is hammering hard at the federal government because of her deficit and how to do it. And the deficit is trying to layer on things about environmental standards and carbon tax nationally, and it's causing some strain to the oil industry, obviously, and she speaks for the oil industry there. And she used words like naive, ill-informed, tone-deaf to describe her critics in Ottawa and the federal government's way of thinking. And so certainly they've got a budget problem out there, a deficit problem out there. They need to do something about it. But what they don't need is more taxes layered on and environmental demands layered on to dig their way out of the hole. Calgary office vacancies, just about 20%. That's a big vacancy rate for office space in Calgary. There are going to be a lot of real estate firms and REITs, and probably our pension plans are going to be impacted by that because most pension plans have a fair percentage of real estate investment rental properties. So I'd be watching for that. What's in your pension plan? Businesses in Quebec are told to step up on the pipeline and support it. It said it'll make 1.1 million barrels of oil daily available from Alberta through to Quebec, through to New Brunswick. And there's been sort of this Energy East pipeline, like the Keystone pipeline going south, has been blocked. And they're saying it's time for Quebec folks to step forward and support this project and get it going because of the jobs it presents and the health and well-being of Canada. I support it. I think that's a good observation. This is one I noticed myself the other day. It was about ad campaigns in the beef, and in particular, they say there's a growing number of customers are sending unflattering snaps of Canada's advertising to the Canada's advertising watchdog to say about this fraudulent advertising. You go and you see this great big McDonald hamburger, and you go in to see what they actually deliver, and they're so far apart that it's almost misleading. And Subway actually got fined for this because they showed their lobster special Subway sandwich. I remember going looking for one, and what actually gets spread on the bun is so thin, and what's shown in the picture is so large that they say this is just unfair advertising. And so a number of companies, and the complaints are up to 1,774 complaints have been submitted to the watchdog, and they're being investigated to get people to have the ads come more closely reflect actually the product. It makes sense. Air Baltic has agreed to buy some more of the Bombardier C jets. Interesting, they need about 300 Bombardier jets to the break-even point, and they've sold 250, and lo and behold, the piece they're missing is largely based on Air Canada, who put a letter of intent in but has never signed the contract to pick up another 40 or so of these 30 or so of these planes. And so we look at some place here because Air Canada is really in large part a creature of the government. Most of our airports have special concessions, considerations, protection for Air Canada to make sure it survives and does well, and to the exclusion that you won't find too many Middle Eastern planes, airlines coming in, and others getting into our airports. It kind of blocks. And so I see here anyway, the WestJets, they were talking about trying to get a bailout from the federal government. This may be part of it through the Air Canada wing to buy these extra planes to get them up to the break-even point. So we'll watch for the sales on that C series plane. IMF cuts its forecast growth again, down to about 1.5% for 2016. It's continuing to cast down, and once you get down to about 1%, that's pretty marginal as to whether we're into a recession or not in a recession, but they've cut Canada's down to 1.7, and the whole globe has dropped down to a lower figure than anticipated. So the point is the global marketplaces are softening, the global economy is softening, and what to do about it. And this thing we talked about a few minutes ago on oil is just one of those areas that would further depress if the price of oil stays less than $40 a barrel. It continues to drive others out of the marketplace, and pipeline developers and things like that get hurt. And so this idea, the agreement being reached between the Russians and the Saudis and maybe some others to adjust the demand supply curve may be a blessing to the IMF, and that may be why they put the pressure on them to get the global economy fired back up again and away from this disastrous price for oil, as some see it. Companies must buoy up innovation, Scotiabank CEO says. He urges that, and I think we've been talking about that in this course, just what they're talking about. It says that we can't compete with our peers because the productivity gap is still going farther apart. Innovation has to thrive here. And he goes on and says that the skills, and what we talked about last week, he points the point, he says it's argued that there's a disconnect between the skills of many graduates and the needs of the prospective employers. Just what we talked about last week, this growing gap between what we teach and what you're going to need when you get out there is being recognized by the CEO of Scotiabank. And he said that there's growing need for digital savvy employees specializing as programmers, engineers, data scientists. And again, we've talked about that in this class. We said where the business and money will lie for you folks are those that get into those sort of functions. And I add one more to it, and that's that those that are able to market the Internet of Everything have a great future. And he's saying the same thing here, which is interesting. And he said the problem is the talent pool is so small that it drives the wages and prices up because everybody's competing for those very few people in Canada. We have a lot of folks who study medieval history, but their future is not very large as we do this. Canadian securities watchdogs might get expanded. They're going to, our Canadian security regulators are going to enter into expanded powers to investigate wrongdoers across borders with a reciprocal agreement from other watchdog and other nations, and they can come into Canada. So we have this reciprocal agreement going on, and I can see the benefits of that, but I can also suggest to you there's one more step to this New World Order. There's this lack of one more chip away at our sovereignty as a free nation, that we come more and more under sort of a global rules and regulations, and decisions on that are made in Brussels, not in, let's say in this case, downtown Toronto. So we keep looking at it. There's more about the Saudis and the oil and the solution. I think we've talked about that enough to get us into the game. This was fun. Facebook is going to allow chat boxes within apps. So all the people that put apps together can put these chat boxes as part of it, as a part of an overall strategic plan by Facebook to make sure that they take over the pole position to talk in terms of enterprise transactions and customer service. And he says here, you'll never have to call 1-800 again for flowers. That chat box will work on this right now if they're getting up and going. But I also was reading in there too about the same sort of thing with, where did I read that? Oh, Stephen Hawkins, yeah, on the same page. Stephen Hawkins and Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and this is to me, I grew up with, I think it was called Space Gordon or something, but it was a little fold-out page in a book when we talked about space and helmets and going to the moon. And here Stephen Hawkins and Zuckerberg are getting together with a $100 million project they've announced on Tuesday, where they're going to send a swarm of tiny little spaceships, each weighing less than an ounce, a swarm, less than an ounce, and they're driven by laser. And they travel at 1/quarter of the speed of light. And so in 20 years, they'll be at Alpha Centauri, which is the closest possible habitable place that looks something like Earth. So in 20 years, they're going to be there with cameras taking pictures of and bring them back. So in your lifetime, you're going to have answers that we can only dream at and say the speed we could travel, we could never get there. Well, again, the Internet of Everything is going to make that available, with these little swarm of things. And it's not just these. They've got swarms out there, and I can show you maybe next week, put some up. It's in my book. They've got bees, they've got cockroaches, they've got all sorts of little things that you would just look out the window and not think too much of, that are drones and are the ability to track and send pictures back. And so, in fact, again, I just one the other day was the The American Navy now have drone ships about 138 feet long and move quite fast, like the Brador hydrofoil boat that we had in Canada in the early mid-50s. Lifts up, goes at fast speed. Very budget price to run, no troops, so it can run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Take more risks than the regular Navy captain could take because there's no human lives involved, and budget price to run and to build. And so we see more of these drone ships coming. I think we talked in terms of this class about the Russians have a submarine now that's a drone that can lie off the bottom of the coast and on the bottom year and a half later and then reactivate and come back up to the surface. And so it's certainly changing our thoughts on warfare and the traditional ways. Anyway, Mexico blocks the EU-U.S. trade deal, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Backs it, they've agreed to sign on to it. Canada has not signed on yet, and I just issue this caveat that we have to be careful. No doubt we'll get sucked along in the vortex, in the stream, but understand that we sign these free trade agreements, and I'm all for free trade, but we do blanket free trade agreements without protection for our workers and our farmers and folks of this nature that are really effective. And I don't mean just subsidies, they have to be effective. Then business like water is going to go to where the location economies are. And if Mexico has got cheaper labor and there's no impediments to travel and trade, then our car industries are going to go to Mexico. And the same thing for the European and same thing for the Asian. And my observation is simply this, that Canadians and Canadian wages and Canadian safety nets and the way we're structured, I don't see how we can compete with location economies that have low wages. And so I'm very concerned about the transatlantic partnership. I'm concerned about the Trans-Pacific partnership, and not just the patent legislation and things of that nature, but also the real impact it's going to have on on our workers in Canada. It's worth looking at. Anyway, Mexico signed on. I suspect that Canada's not far behind. Israel Prime Minister, he boycotted McDonald's. He said the country is going to downsize its consumption of junk food and boycott McDonald's. He said there's no need to eat junk food. He says, not in our country. So I guess it's good enough in Canada, though. We can continue to eat it here, can we? This is one near and dear to my heart as a victory gardener. One of the garden care giants, ARTHO, Ortho products, it's going to adjust its chemicals, the spray they put on, and Roundup's another one that this company, but other companies use to great quantities. The result is they've killed up about 80% of the bee population in North America, and folks, we need bees to make our food be pollinated. If it's not pollinated, you're not going to have food. It attacks the nervous system of these animals, of the bees. My wife and I, Pauline, who was just here a few minutes ago, we got some mason bees in our backyard. Look like big flies, and they're a good substitute. But next year it's our hope to actually get a couple of beehives and, with some professional help, get involved in getting our own. It costs more than it's worth. I think each hive, they've said, I can get about 10 quarts of honey, and it costs far more than that to get the 10 quarts of honey. But it's the food security aspect of knowing they're coming in your backyard and that they're pollinating your victory garden and your flowers. So this week, we could talk a bit about bees' death, the links, the importance of bees, and what are we going to do about it. I think that maybe, I might just throw one in. So again, there's been something on my mind is the electromagnetic pulses and the Carrington event. I'd ask you to think about that today somehow. It doesn't take much in the atmosphere of a blast, of a shock, of something that would disrupt the electronic grid in North America. And some of the generators are such that it would take a long period of time to get the electricity back up and going. And so my question to you is, look at the dangers of EMPs and from solar flares or from a terrorist or from for some reason the grid system goes down. What impact will that have on your business and on your family and your home life? Worth a conversation. In any event, folks, that's it for today. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm certainly enjoying the course, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.